The transport ship landed with a soft thud on the frozen surface of Kepler 442b. Snow swirled around the landing pad as 6 students stepped out into the bitter cold. Their breath formed white clouds in the thin air as they pulled their thermal suits tighter. Professor Veltar emerged last from the ship. The tall, crystalline being moved with graceful steps across the ice. His translucent blue skin sparkled in the pale sunlight. When he spoke, his voice had a musical quality that made the students listen carefully. "Welcome to your final field examination," Veltar announced, his arms spreading wide to show the white landscape around them. "This planet holds secrets from a civilization that died out millions of years ago. Today you will prove your skills as xenorchaeologists." Deho adjusted his equipment pack and looked around at his fellow students. At 24, he was one of the older students in the group. His engineering background made him different from the others who studied ancient cultures and dead languages. He preferred practical solutions to theoretical problems. Next to him stood Nari, his girlfriend of 2 years. She was smaller than Deho but had sharp eyes that missed nothing. Her anthropology training taught her to watch people and understand their behavior. She noticed things others did not see. Kong Min walked behind them, carrying more equipment than anyone else. The physics student loved to measure and analyze everything. His notebooks were filled with numbers and formulas that made sense only to him. He was 25 but looked younger because of his constant excitement about learning new things. The 3 other students were not human. Heian Wu belonged to the Aquarian species. His blue-green skin glistened with moisture even in the dry. Cold, 4 long tentacles grew from his shoulders and moved constantly as he examined their surroundings. His people lived in the deep oceans of their homeworld and specialized in underwater archaeology. Lila was a Vexani, one of the insect-like species that dominated several star systems. Her 6 legs moved in perfect rhythm as she walked across the uneven ice. 2 large compound eyes took in every detail of the landscape. Her people were known for their skill in geological surveys and could find mineral deposits that others missed. The last student was Tornine, a member of the silicon-based Lethan race. His body looked like it was made of living rock and crystal. He moved slowly but with great strength. The Lethans understood crystal technology better than any other species in the galaxy. Tornine specialized in studying how ancient civilizations used crystals in their technology. Professor Veltar led the group across the snow toward a dark opening in a nearby cliff face. The cave entrance was partially hidden by hanging ice formations. Strange symbols were carved into the rock around the opening. "These markings are over 3 million years old," Veltar explained as they approached. "The civilization that made them had technology we still do not fully understand. They could manipulate matter at the molecular level and create energy fields that lasted for centuries." Deho studied the symbols with interest. His engineering mind tried to figure out how they were made. The cuts were too precise for simple tools. Some kind of energy beam must have carved them into the solid rock. I took pictures of the symbols from different angles. She had learned to document everything during archaeological expeditions. Her professors always said that details others ignored often held the most important clues. Kongmin pulled out his scanner and began taking readings. The device beeped softly as it analyzed the rock composition and energy signatures. His eyebrows rose as he read the results. "Professor," Kongmin said, "these readings are unusual. The rock shows signs of recent energy exposure, not ancient." Veltar moved closer to look at the scanner. His crystalline face showed no emotion, but his voice carried a note of authority. "Your equipment must be malfunctioning, student. The exposure you detect is residual energy from the ancient technology. It is common in sites this old." Kongmin looked at his scanner again but did not argue with his professor. He made notes in his datapad and continued his measurements. The group entered the cave and immediately felt the temperature drop even further. Their lights cut through the darkness and revealed a tunnel that led deep into the cliff. The walls were covered with more symbols and strange metallic formations that seemed to grow out of the rock itself. "Stay close together," Veltar instructed. "These caves can be dangerous." The ancient builders left many traps to protect their secrets. They walked deeper into the tunnel, their footsteps echoing off the walls. The metallic formations became more complex as they went further in. Some looked like mechanical devices, while others resembled organic structures. None of the students had seen anything like them before. Hyenwoo's tentacles moved excitedly as he examined the formations. His species had encountered similar technology in underwater ruins on his homeworld. But these structures were far more advanced than anything the Aquarians had discovered. Lila's compound eyes tracked every detail of the cave walls. Her geological training helped her understand how the formations were connected to the natural rock. Someone had used incredibly advanced technology to integrate artificial structures with the natural cave system. Tor 9 moved slowly, but studied everything with great attention. His people understood crystal technology, but these formations used principles that were beyond even Lethan knowledge. The energy patterns were unlike anything in his database. After walking for nearly an hour, they reached a large chamber. The ceiling stretched high above them, disappearing into darkness. More metallic formations covered the walls, and some even hung from the ceiling like strange chandeliers. "This is the main archaeological site," Veltar announced. "You will work here for the next several hours. Document everything you find. Take measurements, photographs, and samples. Your final grades depend on the quality of your work." The students spread out across the chamber and began their work. Deho focused on the mechanical-looking formations, trying to understand their function. Nari documented the relationship between the symbols and the metallic structures. Kangmin took energy readings from every surface he could reach. The alien students worked with equal dedication. Hyenwoo compared the formations to similar structures his people had found. Leila analyzed the geological aspects of the chamber. Tor 9 studied the crystal components that were integrated throughout the metallic formations. Hours passed as they worked. The chamber was so interesting that none of them noticed how much time had gone by. They were completely focused on their discoveries and the mysteries they were trying to solve. Professor Veltar watched them work but stayed near the entrance to the chamber. He occasionally made notes on his own datapad but spent most of his time observing his students. His crystalline face remained expressionless, but his eyes tracked every movement they made. When Deho finally looked up from his work, he realized something was wrong. The entrance to the chamber was no longer dark. Instead, a faint blue glow filled the tunnel they had used to enter. "Professor," Deho called out, "what is that light?" Veltar turned toward the tunnel entrance. The blue glow was getting brighter and seemed to be moving toward them. "Interesting," the professor said in his musical voice. "It appears the ancient security systems have activated." The other students stopped their work and gathered around the entrance. The blue glow had formed a solid wall of energy that completely blocked the tunnel. They were trapped in the chamber with no way out. "Do not worry," Veltar said calmly. "This is simply part of the archaeological experience. These ancient sites often have automatic security features. The barrier will deactivate in time." But as Deho looked at his professor's face, he saw something that made him uneasy. For just a moment, Veltar's expression had changed. Instead of concern or surprise, the professor looked satisfied, as if everything was going exactly as he had planned. The blue energy barrier pulsed gently as the students stared at it in growing concern. Kangmin approached the wall of light and held up his scanner. The device made alarmed beeping sounds as it detected massive energy levels. "Professor Veltar?" Kangmin said, his voice worried. "This barrier is not ancient technology. The energy signature matches current Zephyrian power systems." Veltar's crystalline form seemed to shift and change in the blue light. His musical voice took on a different tone, colder and more mechanical. "Your observation skills are excellent, Student Kangmin. Yes, this is Zephyrian technology. Very recent Zephyrian technology." The temperature in the chamber began to drop. Rapidly, the students pulled their thermal suits tighter, but the cold seemed to seep through the fabric. Frost started forming on the metallic formations around them. "I do not understand," Nari said, stepping closer to Deho. Why would there be Zephyrian technology in an ancient archaeological site? Professor Veltar moved to the center of the chamber. His crystalline skin began to glow with the same blue light as the barrier. When he spoke, his voice echoed strangely off the walls. Because this is not an archaeological site, Veltar explained. This is a testing facility built by the Zephyrian Collective. Everything you see here was constructed specifically for this moment. The metallic formations around the chamber began to hum with energy. Lights appeared along their surfaces, creating complex patterns that hurt to look at directly. The students backed away from the walls as the formations became more active. Testing facility? Hanwu asked, his tentacles writhing nervously. What kind of testing? Survival testing, Veltar replied. The collective has a theory about different species and how they react under extreme stress. We believe that most intelligent life forms will shut down and wait for rescue when faced with impossible situations. Humans, however, are different. Deho felt a chill that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. You brought us here on purpose. This is not a field trip at all. Correct, Veltar said. You and your human companions are the primary subjects of this experiment. The other students are here to provide comparison data. The humming from the walls grew louder and seemed to penetrate their minds. Layla stumbled and nearly fell as her 6 legs suddenly felt unsteady. Hyenwu's tentacles stopped moving and hung limply from his shoulders. Tornine's movements became even slower than usual. What are you doing to them? Nari demanded, moving to help Layla stay upright. The formations emit a neural dampening field, Veltar explained in his cold scientific voice. It affects the problem-solving centers of most species' brains. Under stress, they become passive and wait for outside help. This is a survival mechanism that most intelligent life has evolved. Kangmin tried to use his scanner to measure the neural field, but his hands were shaking. Not from cold, but from something else. His mind felt foggy and his thoughts moved. Slowly, simple problems that should have been easy suddenly seemed impossible to solve. The 3 alien students were affected even worse. Henwu sat down heavily on the cave floor and stared at the wall with empty eyes. Layla curled up in a defensive position with her legs tucked under her body. Tornine stood motionless like a statue made of living rock. As you can see, Veltar continued, the dampening field works perfectly on most species. It makes them docile and helpless. They lose the ability to think creatively or solve complex problems. But something was wrong with the professor's experiment. The 3 human students were not reacting the way he expected. While their alien classmates became passive and withdrawn, the humans remained alert and angry. Deho's mind was still sharp and focused. The neural dampening field seemed to have little effect on him. If anything, the dangerous situation made him think more clearly. His engineering training kicked in as he began analyzing their predicament. Nari moved between the alien students, checking on each one. Her anthropological training helped her understand what was happening to them. The dampening field was triggering their species' natural responses to overwhelming danger. But her own mind remained clear and analytical. Kang-Min fought against the mental fog that tried to cloud his thoughts. His physics background gave him tools to understand what was happening. The dampening field worked by disrupting specific brainwave patterns. Human brains, it seemed, had different patterns that were harder to disrupt. Fascinating, Veltar said, studying the humans with new interest. The field is having minimal effect on you. Our simulations predicted you would be more resistant. But this exceeds our expectations. The temperature continued to drop. Ice began forming on the walls and floor of the chamber. The alien students shivered uncontrollably, but their mental dampening made them unable to think of ways to stay warm. Why are you doing this? Deho asked, his breath forming white clouds as he spoke. Scientific advancement, Veltar replied. The collective needs to understand how different species react in crisis situations. This knowledge will help us predict behavior during emergencies and plan accordingly. What about ethics? Nari demanded. You cannot experiment on people without their permission. Lower species do not require permission, Veltar said dismissively. Your consent is irrelevant to the greater good of scientific knowledge. Kongmin's scanner was still working despite his shaking hands. The readings showed that the temperature would continue dropping for several more hours. At the current rate, they would all freeze to death long before any rescue could arrive. How long does this test last? Kongmin asked. Until you die or find a way to escape, Veltar answered. Most species simply wait and die. We are curious to see what humans will do differently. The professor moved toward a section of the wall that looked different from the rest. He pressed his crystalline hand against a hidden panel, and part of the wall slid open. Beyond it was a smaller chamber with warm air flowing out. I will observe from here, Veltar said as he stepped through the opening. The chamber is temperature-controlled and has communication equipment. I will record everything that happens for the collective's research. The wall closed behind him, leaving the students alone in the rapidly cooling chamber. The alien students had become completely passive, sitting or lying on the floor with vacant expressions. The neural dampening field had shut down their higher brain functions, but the three humans were different. Instead of becoming passive, they became more focused. The dangerous situation triggered responses that their evolution had built into them over millions of years. They were descendants of persistence hunters who had survived ice ages and natural disasters. We need to work together, Deho said, looking at Nari and Kongmin. The others cannot help themselves right now. It is up to us to find a way out of this. Nari nodded and continued checking on their alien classmates. They are alive but not responsive. The dampening field has put them into some kind of protective trance. Kongmin studied his scanner readings and tried to understand their situation. The temperature will reach lethal levels in about 6 hours. The barrier is powered by a massive energy source outside the chamber. We cannot break through it with anything we have. Deho looked around the chamber with new eyes. Instead of seeing an ancient archaeological site, he now saw a prison designed to kill them slowly. But his engineering mind was already working on the problem. Every trap had a weakness. Every system had flaws that could be exploited. The question was whether they could find the weakness before they all froze to death in Professor Veltar's scientific experiment. The chamber grew colder by the minute. Ice crystals formed on every surface, including the students' clothing and equipment. The three alien students remained in their trance-like state, their bodies conserving energy while their minds shut down. All unnecessary functions. Deho knelt beside Hyeon-woo and checked his pulse. The Aquarian's skin felt cold and clammy, but his heartbeat was steady. They are alive, he reported to the others, but their bodies are going into some kind of hibernation mode. It makes sense from an evolutionary perspective, Nari observed, wrapping her arms around herself for warmth. When faced with impossible odds, most species conserve energy and wait for conditions to improve. It is a survival strategy that has worked for millions of years. Kongmin continued taking readings with his scanner, his fingers stiff from the cold. The dampening field is affecting their brain chemistry. It triggers the same response their ancestors used during natural disasters or predator attacks. But the humans were reacting completely differently. Instead of shutting down, their minds became sharper and more focused. The cold and danger activated systems in their brains that had been shaped by countless generations of ancestors who survived by thinking their way out of deadly situations. Deho felt his engineering training take over as he analyzed their prison. The chamber was roughly circular, about 20 meters across. The metallic formations covered most of the walls and ceiling. The floor was natural rock covered with a thin layer of ice. We need to understand what we are dealing with, he said, moving to examine one of the wall formations more closely. These are not random decorations. They serve specific functions in the testing system. Nari followed him and began documenting the formations with her camera. Her anthropological training taught her to look for patterns in cultural artifacts. Even though these were not ancient relics, they were still created by an intelligent species, with specific purposes in mind. Look at this, she said, pointing to a series of formations that formed a regular pattern around the chamber. They are positioned at equal intervals. Each one is connected to the others by those thin lines in the rock. Kangmin joined them at the wall and scanned the formations. The lines are fiber optic cables made from crystalline material. They carry data and energy between the different components. While the alien students lay motionless on the floor, the humans worked together to understand their situation. They shared information freely and built on each other's observations. This kind of cooperation was another trait their species had evolved over thousands of years of survival challenges. The temperature control system must be built into these formations, Daeho said, studying the largest structure near the center of the chamber. If we can disable it, we might be able to stop the cooling process. But we do not know how Zephyrian technology works, Nari pointed out. We could make things worse by damaging the wrong component. Kangmin was studying his scanner readings carefully. Actually, I think I am beginning to understand the system. The energy flows follow patterns similar to human electrical circuits, just much more advanced. The cold was becoming dangerous now. Their breath formed thick clouds, and ice was building up on their equipment. The alien students' breathing had become very slow and shallow as their bodies tried to conserve heat. Daeho knew they needed to act soon. His survival instincts, inherited from ancestors who had lived through ice ages, told him that waiting was death. Humans had survived as a species because they acted when action was needed. We need to move our friends to the warmest part of the chamber, he said, looking around for the best location. Then we need to find a way to generate heat while we figure out how to escape. They carefully moved the 3 alien students to a spot near the chamber wall where the air was slightly warmer. Han Wu's tentacles were completely limp, and his skin had turned a pale blue-green color. Layla's compound eyes had closed, and her 6 legs were tucked tightly against her body. Tornine felt like a block of stone, cold and motionless. They are going deeper into hibernation, Nari observed. Their species probably evolved this response to survive harsh winters or other environmental disasters. It will keep them alive for a while, Kangmin agreed, but only if we can prevent the temperature from dropping too much further. Daeho was already thinking about heat sources. Their equipment included several devices that generated energy. The scanners, cameras, and data pads all had power cells that produced heat as a byproduct of their operation. We can use our equipment to create a heat source, he said, gathering the devices together. If we modify the power cells to discharge faster, they will generate more heat. That could work for a short time, Kangmin said, but the power cells will burn out quickly. We need a more sustainable solution. Nari was examining their other supplies. We have specimen containers with alcohol-based preservatives. Those could burn and provide heat. Good thinking, Daeho said. We can use the alcohol as fuel and the metal containers as a combustion chamber. While his companions gathered materials, Daeho studied the chamber walls more carefully. His engineering mind was working on a larger problem. Even if they could generate heat temporarily, they still needed to find a way out of the chamber. The energy barrier blocking the entrance was too powerful to break with anything they had. But barriers needed power sources, and power sources had weaknesses. The question was how to find and exploit those weaknesses. Look at this, Kangmin said, pointing to his scanner. The energy readings are not uniform around the chamber. There are fluctuations in the power flow. Daeho studied the readings carefully. The system is designed to maintain specific conditions, but it has to adapt to changes. If we can create the right kind of change, we might be able to disrupt it. What kind of change? Nari asked, helping him arrange the alcohol containers in a metal framework they had built from equipment parts. Heat, Daeho said with growing excitement. Massive amounts of focused heat. The system is designed to keep us cold. If we can generate enough heat in the right place, we might overload the temperature control systems. Kangmin looked at the scanner readings again. The power conduits run through the walls. If we could heat one section enough, it might damage the control systems. Or melt our way through the wall, Daeho added. These formations are integrated with the natural rock. If we can melt the ice and heat the rock enough, we might be able to create structural damage. It was a dangerous plan with no guarantee of success. But as the temperature continued to drop and their alien friends slipped deeper into hibernation, the humans knew they had to try something. Waiting was not an option for their species. Their ancestors had survived because they took calculated risks when survival was at stake. They had learned to use fire, build tools, and modify their environment instead of simply adapting to it. These were the traits that would either save them or kill them in Professor Veltar's deadly experiment. Deho worked quickly to set up their first heating system. He arranged the alcohol containers in a circle and used metal strips from their equipment to create a crude but functional combustion chamber. His hands were nearly numb from the cold, but his engineering training guided him through the process. "We need to get everyone closer together," he said as he worked. "Body heat sharing is the most immediate thing we can do." Nari and Kangmin helped move the unconscious alien students into a tight group. They arranged their thermal suits and equipment to create a windbreak around the small area. It was a basic survival technique that humans had used for thousands of years. "This is what my grandfather taught me about surviving in the mountains," Nari said as she tucked insulation around Leela's motionless form. "When the weather turns deadly, you share warmth and protect each other." Kangmin was using his scanner to monitor their friends' vital signs. Their breathing and heart rates are very slow, but stable. The hibernation response is keeping them alive, but they need external heat to prevent their core temperatures from dropping too low. Deho struck a spark with 2 pieces of metal and carefully lit the alcohol fuel. A small blue flame appeared, immediately providing warmth to the area around them. The heat felt wonderful after hours of growing cold, but he knew it would not last long. "This will buy us maybe an hour," he said, studying the flame. "The alcohol will burn out quickly, and we do not have enough fuel to keep this going all night." While the small fire warmed their immediate area, Deho's mind was working on bigger problems. He studied the chamber walls and the metallic formations, looking for weaknesses they could exploit. His engineering background helped him see the structures as systems with inputs, outputs, and failure points. "Kangmin," he said, "show me those power readings again. I want to understand how the energy flows through this place." Kangmin held up his scanner and pointed to different parts of the display. "The main power source is outside the chamber, probably in Professor Veltar's observation room. But there are distribution nodes throughout the walls that regulate energy to different systems. Temperature control, lighting, the neural dampening field, and the entrance barrier," Deho said, counting off the systems he had identified. "They all need power, and that power has to flow through conduits in the walls." Nari looked up from checking on Hyanwu. "You are thinking about overloading the system somehow?" "Maybe," Deho said. "But first I want to try something simpler. Look at all this ice and snow." He gestured to the chamber around them. Every surface was covered with a layer of ice, and snow had begun falling from somewhere near the ceiling. The temperature control system was creating a winter environment inside the cave. "Snow and ice are just frozen water," he continued. "Water conducts heat very well, and it takes a lot of energy to change from solid to liquid to gas." Kangmin's eyes lit up with understanding. "You want to use the snow as a heat transfer medium." "Exactly," Deho said. "If we can build a larger heating system and surround it with packed snow, we can create a thermal mass that stores and radiates heat much more efficiently than just burning fuel in open air." Nari looked skeptical. "But where will we get enough fuel for a larger fire? We only have a few containers of alcohol." Deho was already looking around the chamber for other materials they could use. "We have plenty of metal from the equipment and formations. Some of the electronic components contain materials that will burn. And look at this." He pointed to some of the metallic formations on the walls. "These structures contain organic polymers and synthetic materials. If we can break them apart, we might be able to use them as fuel." It was a risky plan. Damaging the chamber's systems might make their situation worse. But as the small alcohol fire began to burn lower, they knew they needed to try something more ambitious. Help me gather materials, Deho said. We need metal for a combustion chamber, insulation for heat control, and anything that will burn for fuel. They worked together to collect what they needed. Kangmin used his scanner to identify which components contained flammable materials. Neri found synthetic fabric and plastic parts that could serve as kindling. Deho began designing a more sophisticated heating system. The key is controlled combustion, he explained as he worked. We need to burn the fuel slowly and efficiently, then use the snow as thermal mass to store and distribute the heat. He built a larger metal chamber using parts from their scientific equipment. The walls were double-layered with air gaps for insulation. A crude chimney made from metal tubing would direct smoke away from their breathing area. Now we pack snow around the combustion chamber, he said, scooping up handfuls of the white powder that covered the floor. The snow will melt from the heat, but that actually helps us. Water holds heat much better than air. Nari and Kangmin helped pack snow around the metal chamber until it was completely buried in a large mound. Only the fuel input and chimney remained exposed. The setup looked primitive, but it was based on solid engineering principles. This is brilliant, Kangmin said, taking scanner readings of their construction. You are creating a thermal battery. The melting snow will absorb heat energy, and the liquid water will continue radiating that heat even after the fire goes out. Deho lit the new heating system and immediately felt the difference. The controlled combustion produced much more heat than their small alcohol fire. The snow around the metal chamber began to melt, creating a pool of water that steamed in the cold air. It is working, Nari said with excitement. The temperature around us is rising. But as they watched their heating system work, Deho noticed something unexpected. The heat was affecting more than just their immediate area. Steam was rising from the melting snow, and some of that steam was reaching the walls of the chamber. Look at the formations, he said, pointing to the nearest wall structure. The metal is starting to sweat. Kangmin checked his scanner and found rapidly changing energy readings. The heat is affecting the power conduits in the walls. The thermal sensors are registering temperature changes throughout the system. That gives me an idea, Deho said, his engineering mind working through the possibilities. What if we do not try to overload the system? What if we confuse it instead? How do you mean? Nari asked. This chamber is designed to maintain specific environmental conditions, Deho explained. Cold temperature, controlled humidity, regulated airflow. But we are creating conditions the system was not designed to handle. He looked at the melting snow around their heater and the steam rising toward the ceiling. If we can create enough heat in the right places, we might be able to make the system malfunction. Not by breaking it, but by giving it problems it cannot solve. Kangmin studied his scanner readings with growing excitement. The power distribution is already fluctuating. The system is trying to compensate for the heat we are generating. Then we need to generate more heat, Deho said with determination. And we need to focus it where it will do the most good. Deho studied the chamber walls with new understanding. The heat from their improvised system was creating visible changes in the metallic formations. Condensation formed on the surfaces, and some of the smaller structures were actually changing color as their temperature rose. We need to build something bigger, he announced, his mind racing through engineering possibilities. Something that can generate sustained, focused heat exactly where we need it. Kangmin looked concerned. We are already using most of our available fuel. How can we make a larger heating system? By being smarter about how we use the materials we have, Deho replied. He began gathering more snow from around the chamber, packing it into dense piles near different wall sections. The snow is not just insulation, it is our primary tool. Nari watched him work, trying to understand his plan. You want to use snow to create heat? That seems impossible. Not create heat, Deho corrected. Store it, focus it, and use it. To transfer energy where we need it most. He moved to a section of the wall where Kangmin's scanner showed strong energy readings. The formations here were more complex, with multiple connections disappearing into the rock. This area seemed to be a major junction point for the chamber's control systems. "Help me build a snow heater here," he said, beginning to pack snow against the wall in a specific pattern. "Snow heater?" Kangmin asked. "That term does not make sense." Daeho smiled despite their dangerous situation. "It does if you understand heat transfer principles. We are going to create a thermal focusing system using snow as the primary component." He began shaping the snow into a large mound against the wall, but this was not random packing. He created channels and cavities within the snow structure, forming a complex three-dimensional pattern. "The snow has amazing thermal properties," he explained as he worked. "It insulates, but it also conducts heat in predictable ways. When it melts, it absorbs energy. When it refreezes, it releases that energy." Nari and Kangmin helped him shape the snow structure according to his instructions. They created a central chamber within the snow mound, surrounded by carefully designed passages and air gaps. "Now we need metal components to create the actual heating element," Daeho continued. He disassembled more of their equipment, extracting metal parts and electronic components. These power cells contain lithium compounds that burn very hot when properly ignited. "You want to create a controlled chemical reaction inside the snow?" Kangmin asked, understanding dawning on his face. "Exactly. But not just any reaction. We need sustained, high-temperature combustion that will heat the metal components, which will then transfer that heat to the surrounding snow." Daeho built a complex metal framework inside the snow chamber. Multiple fuel sources were connected through a series of metal tubes and chambers. The design allowed for controlled burning that would last much longer than their previous simple fires. "The genius is in the heat exchange," he said, making final adjustments to the system. "The burning fuel heats the metal framework. The framework transfers heat to the surrounding snow. The melting snow creates liquid water that holds and distributes the heat throughout the entire structure." But the most important part of his design was the focusing mechanism. The snow structure was shaped to direct the heat towards specific points on the chamber wall. Instead of heating the entire area randomly, the snow heater would concentrate thermal energy exactly where the power conduits were located. "This is incredible," Nari said, watching steam begin to rise from the snow structure as Daeho lit the fuel system. "You have turned snow into a heat weapon." The snow heater worked better than even Daeho had hoped. The sustained chemical reaction inside the metal framework created intense heat that melted the surrounding snow into water. But instead of simply running away, the water was trapped within the structure and continued to absorb and distribute heat energy. Within minutes, the entire snow mound was radiating heat like a giant thermal battery. Steam rose from its surface and flowed across the chamber walls. The temperature near the wall formations began rising rapidly. "Look at the scanner readings," Kangmin said excitedly. "The power fluctuations are increasing. The wall systems are having trouble maintaining stable operation." The formations on the targeted wall section were visibly affected by the heat. Metal components expanded and contracted as their temperature changed. Condensation formed and dripped from the structures. Some of the smaller formations actually sparked as their electronics overheated. "It is working," Daeho said with satisfaction. "The control systems cannot handle the thermal stress we are creating," but he was not finished. While the first snow heater continued to operate, he began building a second one near a different wall section. This time, Nari and Kangmin understood the process and helped him work much faster. "We need to create multiple failure points," he explained. "If we can overheat several different control nodes simultaneously, the entire system might shut down." The second snow heater was even more sophisticated than the first. Daeho had learned from his initial design and made improvements. This version could maintain higher temperatures for longer periods and focus the heat more precisely. As the second heater began operating, the effects throughout the chamber became dramatic. Steam filled the air, making it difficult to see more than a few meters. The temperature rose from deadly cold to merely uncomfortable. Most importantly, their alien friends began showing signs of recovery. Hyunwoo's tentacles twitched slightly as his body responded to the warming air. Leela's compound eyes opened briefly before closing again. Tornine's crystal-like skin became slightly more transparent as his internal temperature rose. "They're coming out of hibernation," Nari observed, checking their vital signs. "The heat is allowing their bodies to resume normal function." But the most dramatic changes were happening to the chamber's control systems. Kongmin's scanner showed power failures cascading through multiple wall sections. The neural dampening field flickered on and off as its generators overheated. Emergency systems tried to compensate for the thermal damage but could not keep up. "The chamber is losing environmental control," Kongmin reported. "Multiple systems are shutting down to prevent permanent damage." Daeho looked at the energy barrier that still blocked their exit. It was flickering now, its blue glow becoming unstable, as the power system struggled with the thermal overload they had created. "One more heater should do it," he said, gathering materials for a third construction. "If we can create a thermal cascade failure, the entire system will have to shut down." But as he began building the third snow heater, he noticed something that made him change his plan. The heat from the first two systems was affecting the chamber walls in an unexpected way. The ice that covered the rock surfaces was melting, but underneath the ice, the rock itself was beginning to crack. "The thermal expansion is creating structural damage," he realized. "We might not need to shut down the barrier. We might be able to melt our way out." The chamber that had seemed like an inescapable prison was revealing its weakness. Professor Veltar's sophisticated technology depended on precise environmental control. By creating massive thermal disruption, the humans had found a way to turn the chamber's own systems against it. The snow heaters continued their work, pumping heat into the walls and creating conditions that the Zephyrian technology could not handle. What had begun as a simple survival strategy was becoming something much more powerful, a methodical dismantling of their prison from the inside out. Steam filled the chamber as the snow heaters worked at full capacity. The air that had been deadly cold just hours before was now warm and humid. Water dripped from the ceiling and walls as ice formations melted throughout the space. Daeho positioned the third snow heater at a critical location where Kongmin's scanner showed the highest concentration of power conduits. This wall section contained the main control lines for the chamber's barrier system. If they could create enough thermal damage here, the entire containment field might collapse. "The wall is starting to crack," Nari observed, pointing to hairline fractures that were appearing in the rock surface. "The heat expansion is creating structural damage." The cracks spread outward from the points where the snow heaters focused their thermal energy. Ice that had filled the natural fissures in the rock melted away, revealing the underlying stone structure. More importantly, it exposed the artificial conduits that carried power and data throughout the chamber. "Those are fiber optic cables," Kongmin said, studying the exposed technology. The Zephyrians integrated their control systems directly into the cave walls. Daeho examined the exposed conduits with his engineer's eye. The crystalline cables were beautiful but also fragile. They were designed to work within specific temperature ranges, and the thermal shock from rapid heating was causing them to crack and fail. "Perfect," he said with satisfaction. "We are not just overheating the electronics. We are physically destroying the infrastructure." The effects of their thermal attack were spreading throughout the chamber. Power failures cascaded from one system to another as overheated components shut down to protect themselves. The neural dampening field that had kept their alien friends unconscious flickered and died completely. Hyunwoo was the first to wake up fully. His tentacles moved sluggishly at first, then with increasing strength as his body recovered from the enforced hibernation. His large eyes opened and focused on the steamy chaos around him. "What happened?" he asked weakly. "Where are we?" "Still trapped," Nari replied, helping him sit up properly. "But Daeho found a way to fight back against the system that was holding us." Lila stirred next, her 6 legs unfolding as consciousness returned. Her compound eyes tracked the movement of steam and the glow from the snow heaters. "The temperature... It is warm now. How is that possible?" Human engineering, Kangmin said proudly, helping Tornine as the silicon-based student slowly returned to awareness. Daeho built heating systems that the Zephyrian technology could not handle. Tornine's crystal-like body resonated with a low harmonic sound as he fully awakened. His people communicated partially through vibration, and the sound conveyed confusion and amazement. "The chamber systems are failing," he said in his slow, deep voice. "I can sense the crystalline infrastructure breaking down." With all the students conscious again, they could work together to escape their prison. But Daeho was already focused on the next phase of his plan. The snow heaters had created thermal damage throughout the chamber, but they needed to focus their remaining energy on creating an actual exit. "The barrier at the main entrance is still active," he said, checking the tunnel they had originally used to enter. "But look at this wall section." He led them to an area where the thermal damage was most severe. The rock face was spider-webbed, with cracks, and several of the metallic formations had actually fallen from the wall as their mounting points failed. "This wall is thinner than the others," Daeho explained, "and the thermal damage has weakened it significantly. If we can concentrate enough heat on this specific area, we might be able to melt through to the other side." "What is on the other side?" Hyung-woo asked, his tentacles probing the damaged wall surface. "Unknown," Daeho admitted, "but it has to be better than staying trapped in here." Kangmin scanned the wall section with his equipment. The rock is limestone with metallic inclusions. The heat has already created significant thermal stress. Additional heating could cause catastrophic failure of this entire section. "That is exactly what we want," Daeho said. He began disassembling one of the existing snow heaters and rebuilding it for maximum thermal output. "We need to create a focused heat beam that can melt through rock and metal simultaneously." The other students helped him build the most sophisticated heating system yet. This version used all their remaining fuel sources and concentrated the thermal energy through a narrow metal tube that acted like a cutting torch. "Stand back," Daeho warned as he lit the system. "This is going to generate extreme temperatures." The focused heater worked like a thermal lance, directing a narrow beam of superheated gas and steam directly at the weakened wall. The limestone began to glow red-hot where the beam struck it. Metal components in the wall melted and flowed like liquid. "It is working!" Lila exclaimed, her geological training helping her understand what was happening. "You are literally melting through the mountain." The process was slow but relentless. The thermal lance cut deeper into the wall with each passing minute. Steam and smoke filled the chamber as rock and metal vaporized under the extreme heat. The metallic formations around the target area sparked and failed as their power systems overloaded. "I am detecting air movement," Tornine announced, his crystalline senses picking up changes that the others could not feel. "There is space beyond this wall." The thermal lance had created a hole about the size of a person's head, and cool air was flowing through it from the other side. The temperature difference between the superheated chamber and whatever lay beyond created a strong air current. "We need to make the hole bigger," Daeho said, adjusting the heater to widen the opening. "But carefully, we do not know what is on the other side." As the hole expanded, they could see light coming through from beyond the wall. It was not the artificial blue glow of Zephyrian technology, but natural light that suggested an opening to the outside. "It looks like another cave system," Nari said, peering through the opening. "But this one connects to the surface." The thermal lance had done its work. The hole was now large enough for them to climb through, though the edges were still glowing hot from the melting process. Steam poured through the opening as the temperature difference between the two chambers equalized. "Let the edges cool for a few minutes," Daeho advised. "Then we can make our escape." But as they prepared to leave the chamber that had been their prison, alarms began sounding throughout the facility. Professor Veltar's voice echoed from hidden speakers, no longer calm and scientific but filled with anger and concern. "Subjects have breached containment," his mechanical voice announced. "Thermal damage to Chamber 7 is catastrophic. Security systems have failed, initiating emergency protocols." "He knows we are escaping," Kongmin said, checking his scanner. For new threats. The entire facility is going into lockdown mode. Daeho looked at the cooling hole in the wall, then at his friends who were finally free from the neural dampening field. Then we better move fast. Professor Veltar is not going to let us walk away from his experiment easily. The snow heaters had given them more than just heat and an escape route. They had proven that human ingenuity could overcome even the most sophisticated alien technology. But their real test was just beginning as they prepared to face whatever emergency protocols. The Zephyrian Collective had prepared for escape test subjects. The hole in the wall had cooled enough to touch, though heat still radiated from the melted edges. Daeho tested the opening carefully, making sure it was safe to climb through. Beyond the wall, he could see a natural cave tunnel that led upward toward distant light. This connects to the original cave system, he said, helping the others prepare to escape. Professor Veltar's facility was built inside a natural limestone cave network. Emergency lights flashed throughout their prison chamber as the facility's security systems activated. The damaged wall formations sparked and smoked, their electronics fried by the thermal attack. The air filled with the acrid smell of burned circuits and melted metal. We need to move now, Nari urged, gathering their remaining equipment. Those alarms mean Professor Veltar is calling for help. One by one, they climbed through the hole Daeho had melted in the wall. Henwu went first, his tentacles helping him navigate the rough opening. Lila followed, her 6 legs giving her excellent grip on the uneven surfaces. Tornine moved slowly but steadily, his crystal-like body scraping against the rock. Kang-min paused to take scanner readings of the facility they were leaving behind. The entire chamber is structurally compromised, he reported. The thermal damage has spread to supporting walls. This whole section might collapse. Good, Daeho said grimly as he helped Nari through the opening. Let Professor Veltar explained to his superiors how a few primitive humans destroyed his sophisticated testing facility. As they entered the natural cave system, the difference was immediately obvious. This was real limestone, carved by water over millions of years. No metallic formations covered the walls, and no artificial lighting provided illumination. They had to use their equipment lights to see where they were going. The air is moving, Tornine observed, his crystalline senses detecting currents that the others could not feel. There is a connection to the surface somewhere ahead. They followed the tunnel as it wound upward through the rock. Behind them, they could hear mechanical sounds as Professor Veltar's facility tried to respond to the emergency. Automated systems activated, trying to contain the damage and prevent further escapes, but the thermal destruction Daeho had created was spreading beyond their original chamber. The snow heaters had overloaded power systems throughout the facility. As those systems failed, they triggered cascading failures in other areas. Listen, Nari said, stopping to hear better. From somewhere behind them came the sound of collapsing structures and failing electronics. The whole place is coming apart. The Zephyrian technology was too integrated, Kongmin explained as they continued climbing. When we damaged the thermal control systems, it affected everything else. Power distribution, structural support, environmental control, it was all connected. The tunnel led them through a series of natural chambers, each one bringing them closer to the surface. They could feel the air getting warmer and fresher as they climbed. After hours of artificial environment, the natural cave felt like freedom, but they were not safe yet. Behind them, they heard sounds that were not mechanical. Footsteps echoed through the tunnels, moving faster than human feet could carry someone. Professor Veltar was pursuing them personally. He is following us, Hyenwu said, his tentacles sensing vibrations through the rock, and he is not alone. There are others with him. Security forces, Layla guessed, her geological knowledge helping her interpret the sounds. The facility must have guards or automated defenders. Daeho looked ahead to where the tunnel continued upward. They were making good progress toward the surface, but their pursuers were moving faster. If they were caught in the narrow tunnels, they would have no room to maneuver or defend themselves. We need to slow them down, he said, studying the cave structure around them. His engineering mind was already working on the problem. These limestone tunnels are not very stable. The thermal shock from our heating systems might have weakened them throughout this area. You want to cause a cave-in? Kongmin asked with concern. That could trap us as well. Not a complete collapse, Daeho clarified. Just enough to block the tunnel behind us and buy time to reach the surface. He began examining the tunnel walls and ceiling, looking for stress points where a small amount of additional damage could cause a controlled collapse. The limestone showed fracture lines where geological pressure had created weakness over thousands of years. Here, he said, pointing to a section where the ceiling was supported by a relatively thin pillar of rock. If we can damage this support column, it will bring down enough rock to block the tunnel without affecting the stability ahead of us. They still had some of the chemical fuel left from building the snow heaters. Daeho quickly assembled a small explosive device using the fuel and metal components from their equipment. It was crude but effective for their needs. Everyone get to the other side of that bend, he instructed, pointing to a curve in the tunnel. About 50 meters ahead. The blast and collapse will be contained to this section. As his friends moved to safety, Daeho placed the improvised explosive at the base of the support column. The device would burn rather than explode, creating intense heat that would cause the limestone to crack and fail. He lit the fuse and ran toward the bend, where the others waited. Behind him he could hear Professor Veltar's voice getting closer. As the pursuit party approached their location, the chemical burn worked exactly as planned. The intense heat cracked the limestone pillar, and geological stress did the rest. With a rumbling crash that echoed through the cave system, several tons of rock fell from the ceiling and blocked the tunnel completely. That should hold them for a while, Daeho said with satisfaction as they continued their climb toward the surface, but the sounds of pursuit did not stop. Instead, they heard new noises, mechanical drilling and energy weapons cutting through rock. Professor Veltar's security forces had equipment designed for exactly this kind of situation. They are cutting through the collapse, Tornine reported, his sensitivity to vibration allowing him to monitor their pursuers' progress. But it will take them time. The tunnel began to slope more steeply upward, and they could feel a breeze carrying the scent of fresh air and growing plants. Somewhere ahead was the surface and freedom from Professor Veltar's deadly experiment. Look, Nari called out, pointing ahead to where the tunnel curved. Natural light. The exit from the cave system was a crack in the cliff face, hidden by vegetation but large enough for them to squeeze through. Beyond it, they could see the alien sky of Kepler 442b and the transport ship that had brought them to this frozen world. But as they approached the exit, they heard Professor Veltar's voice echoing through the tunnels behind them. He had broken through the rock fall and was still pursuing them. His musical voice was no longer cold and scientific, it was filled with rage and desperation. You have destroyed years of research, he called after them. The collective will not permit this interference with our experiments. The students ignored his threats and pushed through the crack in the cliff face. Outside, the cold air of Kepler 442b felt wonderful after the artificial environment of the testing facility. They were free from their prison, but they still had to reach their transport and escape the planet before Professor Veltar could stop them permanently. The cold air of Kepler 442b felt like freedom as the 6 students emerged from the hidden cave exit. Snow crunched under their feet as they made their way across the frozen landscape toward their transport ship. Behind them, they could hear Professor Veltar and his security forces still trying to break through the collapsed tunnel. The ship is only 2 kilometers away, Kongmin said, checking his scanner for their location. We can reach it before they get through the cave-in? But as they hurried across the snow, Daeho noticed something troubling. The transport ship's communication array was active, sending signals into space. Professor Veltar was not just pursuing them through the caves, he was calling for backup from orbit. He's contacting other Zephyrian ships, Daeho realized. They might try to prevent us from leaving the planet. Hein Wu's tentacles writhed with agitation as he scanned the sky. My people have protocols for this situation. If we can reach the Galactic University emergency frequency, we can call for help. The ship's communication system has that capability, Leela added, her geological training including knowledge of emergency procedures. But we need to reach it before Professor Veltar's security forces catch up. They ran across the frozen landscape as fast as the terrain would allow. Behind them, mechanical sounds echoed from the cliff face as drilling equipment worked to clear the tunnel collapse. Professor Veltar's voice carried on the wind, no longer threatening but pleading. "You do not understand the importance of this research," he called after them. "The survival characteristics of different species must be documented for the greater good of the galaxy. The greater good does not include murdering students." Nari shouted back without slowing down. They reached the transport ship, just as Professor Veltar and his security team emerged from the cave exit. The Zephyrian professor looked different now. His crystalline skin was cracked and damaged from the thermal stress in the facility, and his movements were jerky and uncontrolled. Tornine quickly activated the ship's emergency beacon while Kong Min began transmitting their location and situation to the Galactic University. The ship's communication array was powerful enough to reach nearby star systems, and help would come if they could hold out long enough. "Security forces are approaching," Haiyan Wu reported, watching Professor Veltar's team advance across the snow. "They have energy weapons and restraint devices." Daeho studied the ship's defensive systems. The transport was not designed for combat, but it had shields and basic weapons for protection against pirates and hostile wildlife. More importantly, it had something Professor Veltar did not expect: human creativity under pressure. "Everyone, get inside and prepare for takeoff," he ordered. "I have one more idea." As his friends secured themselves in the ship, Daeho accessed the transport's engineering systems. The ship used a fusion reactor for power, and that reactor produced massive amounts of heat as a byproduct of operation. Most of that heat was vented safely into space, but the thermal output could be redirected if necessary. "What are you doing?" Nari asked from the pilot's seat. "Creating one last thermal surprise for our professor," Daeho replied, rerouting the ship's heat exchangers to focus their output downward. "He thinks he understands human engineering capabilities. Let me show him how wrong he is." Professor Veltar and his security team approached the ship cautiously, their weapons ready to disable the transport before it could take off. But as they moved within 50 meters of the landing site, Daeho activated his improvised thermal defense system. Superheated plasma from the ship's reactor vented directly downward, instantly vaporizing the snow around the landing pad. The security team found themselves standing in a pool of boiling water and steam as the permafrost melted beneath their feet. "Impossible," Professor Veltar gasped as his team retreated from the thermal attack. "How did they weaponize a civilian transport system?" "Human ingenuity," Daeho said with satisfaction as he fired the ship's engines and lifted off from the planet's surface. The transport climbed rapidly through Kepler 442b's thin atmosphere while Kangmin continued broadcasting their emergency signal. Within hours, they received responses from multiple sources: Galactic University security, Aquarian patrol ships, Vexani mining vessels, and even a Lithan science expedition. The rescue fleet that arrived to investigate found Professor Veltar's testing facility in ruins. The thermal damage from Daeho's snow heaters had cascaded throughout the underground complex, destroying years of research and exposing the illegal experiments to galactic authorities. Professor Veltar himself was arrested and charged with unauthorized experimentation on sentient beings. The Zephyrian Collective officially disavowed his actions, but the incident created a diplomatic crisis that lasted for months. The 6 students became heroes throughout the galaxy, but for different reasons than they expected. The alien students were praised for their resilience and recovery from the neural dampening field, but it was the humans who captured galactic attention. Daeho's snow heater design was studied by engineers from dozens of species. The concept of using frozen water as a thermal energy storage and focusing system revolutionized emergency heating technology. The design was so simple that it could be built from basic materials, yet so effective that it outperformed much more sophisticated systems. You turned our most basic survival needs into our greatest strength, Hyan Wu said during their debriefing at Galactic University. My people are incorporating human thermal management techniques into all our emergency protocols. Leila's Geological Society published a paper on human improvisation methods, studying how Deho had analyzed the cave structure and created controlled collapses. Your species sees engineering solutions where others see only problems, she observed. Tornines. Crystal technology research was completely revolutionized by human approaches to thermal manipulation. Your methods appear primitive, he said in his slow, deep voice, but they achieve results that our most advanced systems cannot match. The academic world was fascinated by how the humans had remained unaffected by the neural dampening field. Research showed that human brain patterns were uniquely chaotic and adaptive, making them resistant to most forms of mental manipulation. But the most important discovery was about human psychology under extreme stress. While other species became passive and waited for rescue, humans became more creative and resourceful. The worse their situation became, the more inventive their solutions grew. Deho and Nari co-authored a paper that became required reading at universities throughout the galaxy, Thermal Dynamics and Species Survival, How Human Persistence Psychology Translates to Crisis Engineering. The paper established humans as the preferred species for emergency response and survival training. We always knew humans were different, Nari wrote in the conclusion, but we never realized that our differences were advantages. What other species see as primitive chaos we call adaptability. What they call impossible problems we call engineering. Challenges. 6 months after their escape from Kepler 442b, Deho received a message from the Galactic Emergency Response Council. They wanted him to design survival equipment for multi-species rescue teams. His snow heater principle was being adapted for use on hundreds of different worlds. They want me to teach other species how to think like humans in emergency situations, he told Nari as they walked across the campus of Galactic University. Can that be taught? She asked. Deho smiled and looked up at the alien stars above. Them, I do not know. But if anyone can figure out how to teach the unteachable, it is probably humans. The incident on Kepler 442b had proven something that the galaxy was only beginning to understand. Humanity's chaotic, adaptive nature was not a weakness to be overcome, but a strength to be celebrated. In a universe full of logical, predictable species, humans offered something unique, the ability to find solutions where none should exist. Professor Veltar had tried to study human survival characteristics and ended up learning more than he ever wanted to know. The species he had dismissed as primitive had systematically dismantled his most advanced technology using nothing but snow, metal scraps, and the stubborn refusal to give up that had carried humanity through ice ages and across the stars. The humans had not just survived his experiment, they had turned it into a demonstration of why their species belonged among the stars.